Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you to everyone for attending this event, which is in honor of International Press Freedom Day, held earlier this month. Now, press freedom is near and dear to our panelists and hopefully to all of you as well. Do you promise you can hear me? Because I'm terrible with mics. Okay. I'm excited for our panelists to share their experiences as journalists, authors, and as people. Yes, people, not just the media. Personally, I'm tired of mainstream media bashing. Are some mainstream media outlets better than others? Sure. Do media outlets make occasional mistakes? Yeah, they do. That's because they're run by people, by human beings who work very hard, often for low pay, crappy benefits, in a tough job where just for added measure, they're also vilified and distrusted by a huge proportion of American society. Sounds like a total blast, right? Whoopee! So in my years as a freelancer and full-time in newsrooms, I never once saw anything dishonest occur. I saw people who were aware of their personal biases and who corrected those biases, sometimes even overcorrected those biases. So I want to honor our journalists here today, and I look forward to learning more about their books. I also want to thank the Poisoned Pen Bookstore. We have a little round of applause for our hosts today. Now, speaking of journalism, as you know, reporting accurate information is more important than ever as we face unprecedented campaigns of disinformation. The intentional spread of false information is impacting our communities at epic proportions, as we see with climate change, COVID-19, and of course the 2020 presidential election. Today, with tools such as AI and unregulated social media algorithms, disinformers have the advantage. And now that the seeds of social distrust have been sown, it's hard to go back. It becomes hard to trust any source of information. But fortunately, each of us can play a role in building communities that are more resilient to disinformation. PEN America has spearheaded a campaign here in Arizona to do just that. If you'd like to help, please put your contact information on the sign-in sheet on the tall table back there next to my handsome husband. Maybe he could wave. Yes, so sign in over there. I'm leading the charge on this work, and I would love to have you by my side. And I promise that the time commitment is very low. And it won't take a lot of effort. So if you're curious, sign up over there, and I'll contact you, and we'll see if you could be of service. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tim Igo. Tim's a super cool guy, and he does so much work to support journalism. He's an attorney, but we'll try to forgive him for that. Being that he's in an alcohol-filled profession, he has a lot in common with authors and journalists. So there's a lot of synergy here today. See, journalists just take it from everybody, don't they? In all seriousness, Tim's not only a lawyer, he's also a journalist. He's editor of the award-winning Arizona Attorney magazine. He's edited and reported for multiple publications, including the Orange County Business Journal. He previously practiced law in California, has an MA from Notre Dame, a JD from UC Law San Francisco. When do you ever sleep? Like, how'd you accomplish all of this? Right? He's president of the Arizona chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. They are our co-hosts here. Round of applause for Society of Professional Journalists, please. He's also been named a Guggenheim Foundation Pew Reporting Fellow numerous times, because once wasn't enough, apparently. To quote him, he says, "I've been finding ways to tell stories for years in multiple professions, both in law practice and in more respectable pursuits." Everyone, please welcome Tim Igo.
Wow, wow, wow. Good to see you all. Hi, Terry. I'm going to try without the mic. We'll see how it goes.
No.
You'll get... I'm sorry?
Tim, use the mic because they're recording it.
All right.
Please, thank you.
All right. So, all right. I am going to use the mic. First of all, that's a best practice. So thank you very much, Christina. People always think up here, I don't need the mic, and we probably do. Second of all, I've learned as I walked in the door that they are going to be streaming this today. So keep it clean, all of you, all right? Thank you, Michelle, and thank you all for coming to this unique event. Deep thanks to Michelle Beaver and Penn for this remarkable idea in the first place. As all great notions do, I said to myself, why didn't I think of that? And I didn't, but Michelle did. Michelle asked me to say something about our group, the Society of Professional Journalists. It's been around since 1909, and our Arizona chapter has been here since 1958. Happily, I wasn't here then. Our mission is simple. The SPJ is dedicated to the perpetuation of a free press as the cornerstone of our nation and our liberty. As SPJ's founder said, to ensure that the concept of self-government outlined by the U.S. Constitution remains a reality into future centuries, the American people must be well informed in order to make decisions regarding their lives and their local and national communities. It is the role of journalists to provide this information in an accurate, comprehensive, timely, and understandable manner, which makes today's speakers frontline participants in a vital part of what keeps communities informed and our nation safe from disinformation. Now, our panelists are accomplished in multiple disciplines, which could make them extremely annoying to be around. But as it turns out, of course, they are delightful and compassionate people who happen to be adept at journalism as reporters, writers, and editors, and as it turns out, as book writers. Historically, our speakers today are in excellent company. Not to embarrass them, but they walk the same journo to author path as luminaries like Ernest Hemingway, Mark Twain, Anna Quindlen, Charles Dickens, Maya Angelou, and others. And unlike Mark Twain, they did it all without ever using the N-word, so how great are they? Too soon? Too soon? Mark Twain, maybe too soon. And already the stream is ruined, so sorry. Now, I've got to say, as somebody who's moved between professions and multiple careers myself, sometimes inelegantly, I deeply appreciate those with the courage to navigate and cross the borders between professions. In my own case, besides a stint as a lawyer in California, I sprung from the field of English literature and I jumped into journalism, resulting in a different cohort of colleagues, but often the same flavor of ramen for dinner. Today's speakers offer us not ramen, but the whole banquet. And so I'm so pleased to welcome them today. So here's what we're going to do. We will have time for audience questions at the end. In fact, as we proceed, I'm hoping our panelists will have questions for each other. In my experience, no one is more curious about an author's process than other authors, so I'm hoping they engage each other and indulge that curiosity. The plan is this. I'll introduce each author and ask them to describe their work. Then each is going to read us an excerpt that they've chosen. I don't know what they're going to read. After that, we're going to dive into some deeper questions, followed by audience questions, and after that, it's all about mingling, signing books, and taking selfies. You with me? Sound good? Excellent. So, Christina, Terry, and Richard, I'm going to open with you. After I introduce you, please briefly describe your book, and you're free to come up if you'd rather read at the podium. Describe your book. If you could, introduce us to the main character or characters and what you believe makes them compelling. Show us that 60-second elevator speech that book agents always talk about. Then you'll read a brief excerpt, and we'll move on. So, Christina, could you start us off?
I'm going to go less than a minute. How about that?
And you know, here, and
Wait a minute.
And while you're getting that
This is not the mic
together,
I'm used to.
I'm
It's the
gonna
mic's fault.
and I'm going to introduce each of you as we go. So I'm going to start with
Okay.
Christina, who received the Tony Hillerman Prize for Best First Mystery Set in the Southwest, which is awesome sauce. Her novel, Off the Air, inspired by her own career, features a TV reporter investigating the suspicious death of a controversial radio talk show host. Hard to picture that ever happening. Christina currently works as a journalist for NPR member station in Phoenix, KJZZ, and her reporting has appeared nationally on NPR and CBS, and in the Republic, Arizona Business Gazette, and the Phoenix Business Journal. Christina, take us away.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you all for coming. I take nothing for granted when it comes to people's kindness. I truly mean it. Thank you for making time to join us today. and Tim and Michelle and everyone else. So Off the Air is my debut mystery. It introduces Jolene Garcia. She is a Phoenix TV reporter trying to cover real news in a society that's obsessed with reels and clicks and likes. When a controversial radio talk show host dies, her bosses are thrilled because she had the last interview with the guy, so they've got the advantage. But not for long. National media descend on Arizona, as they love to do, bringing bigger budgets, getting better scoops, and poor Jolene ends up fighting not only for her job, but her life. Under 60 seconds. Remember that if I start rambling later.
It's everybody up here, standard, set.
Okay. Am I reading now, Tim? Okay, so since I mentioned national media, we're going to have a lot of them in this swing state election year. So this excerpt that I'm going to read is when a network reporter shows up in Jolene's Phoenix newsroom who wants her help. So he introduces himself as Jeffrey Cooper, says, "You can call me Jeff." And in her mind, she says, "No, I'm calling you Network." Here we go. Here's Network. "We just got here and could use your help. We have the transcript of your interview with Larry Lemon," dead talk show host. "Do you have other notes or information?" I motion to the conference room. "When that meeting breaks up, you'll want to talk to David Matthew. He's the executive producer and he's..." Yeah, I know who he is," Network says. "I want something new." "David is handling the latest on the investigation." "How long's that meeting going to last? We've got to get going." Network is oblivious to his inconvenient request and annoying presence. "Don't know, but I sure hear you about needing to get going." I start to turn away and Network's producer steps in front of me. "Hey, Jolene, congratulations on getting the last interview with Larry Lemon." She flashes a mouthful of spiky teeth. "We really appreciate you sharing it. We hear you have an interview scheduled with his ex-wife and we'd like to join you." That's Network code for, "We want to show up when you do so we can take over and set up lights and seating to give the impression she's only talking to us. Even better, we might convince her to talk to us first and leave you out in the cold." I give her a toothless smile. "I don't think so." Network's head bops up from his phone, an eyebrow shoots up. Yes, one brow like The Rock. Except it works for The Rock. Network looks ridiculous. Thank you.
Christina, thank you so much for leading us off. That was fantastic. Terry, I'm going to turn to you now while you open your page. I know. Get ready. Get ready. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Terry. Terry Greene Sterling is an independent journalist, Pulitzer Fellow, we've heard of Pulitzers, author and teacher. She grew up on an Arizona cattle ranch, but she's not Sandra Day O'Connor. So it's the second person I've met who is born on an Arizona cattle ranch. She is a 3-time Arizona Journalist of the Year and winner of over 58 international, national, and regional writing and reporting honors. In books, she's the
58?
co-author she's the author of Illegal Life and Death in Arizona's Immigration War Zone, and she's the co-author of the book I think we're going to hear from today, which is Driving While Brown, Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Hold it high. Sheriff Joe Arpaio versus the Latino Resistance. Terry, please speak to us.
Oh, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Oh, whoa.
I can be your mic stand.
Now we can. Yeah, wow. Okay. Does this make a difference? Okay. Okay, well, the title of the book, Driving While Brown, references a federal court case in Phoenix called the Melendrez case, in which Latino drivers and passengers successfully proved that that their civil rights were violated during traffic stops, ergo driving while brown. And while driving while brown, the case, the Melendrez case, forms the narrative spine of the book. It's really a story about how civil rights violations and discriminatory policing take hold and how difficult it is to eradicate them once they're entrenched in an institution. Okay, but it's not dry. I promise you, it's not a dry book. It's not a dry book. The two main characters are Joe Arpaio, the sheriff of Maricopa County, and Lydia Guzman, who is a leader in the Latino resistance that ultimately brought Arpaio down. They're compelling characters. We're supposed to say why they're compelling characters. So they're compelling characters. First of all, Arpaio's compelling because he's Arpaio, right? I mean, he's world famous guy who, had made inmates wear pink underwear, designed Tent City, and unleashed on the city of Phoenix these absolutely terrifying immigration raids on the streets of Phoenix and in workplaces. Some view him as tragically locked into a persona that he can't escape, and others still view him as an American hero. He was an early mentor to Donald Trump, who is former president and possibly future president. Lydia Guzman is compelling because her greatest asset is also her greatest flaw, and that is tenacity. Because of her activism, she lost her house to foreclosure. She lost her husband to divorce. And for a long time, she lost the love and respect of her children. The two main characters in this book carry the narrative on its back, and sometimes one is up and sometimes one is down. Okay. So that's... Whoa. Okay. Now, our book came out in 2021 when we were in the middle of the pandemic. So I've never done a live reading of the book. This is
Woohoo! Yay!
It was all Zoom, and so I really wondered about what to read for you today. I thought I'd start out a little bit with a little bit of Arpaio's early career. It sort of sets the stage for his workaholism and introduces you to Ava, his wife, who is like trad wife extraordinaire. Okay. So let me just kind of get ready here. Okay. Arpaio applied to be on the U.S. Border Patrol after he got out of the Army, but he told us he flunked the test 3 times. So in 4 years, he had 3 jobs. First, he was a beat cop in an African-American neighborhood in Washington, D.C., where he said he whacked people with his nightstick. I was a pretty aggressive cop, he bragged. Made more arrests than anybody in the precinct. Not that I was prejudiced. I wasn't prejudiced. He wanted to become a detective, but after nearly 4 years, he hadn't been promoted, and, as he put it in Joe's Law, his book, the promotion rolls were backed up. So he moved on to the police force in tiny Las Vegas, Nevada, where he often claimed he arrested Elvis Presley for a traffic violation and took him down to the station house to meet the guys. After 6 months in Las Vegas, Arpaio moved east again, signing up as a narcotics agent for the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, where he would stay for 25 years. We came to understand that Arpaio learned in the small drug enforcement agency then overseen by the Treasury Department. He learned a lot of things that would inform his tenure as Maricopa County Sheriff. He learned how to assume a fictitious role. He learned how to self-validate by inserting himself in the news. And he learned how to create chaos in the United States-Mexico border to achieve a political goal. In the early days, Arpaio dreamed up tough guy characters for his undercover work and jumped into these roles with gusto. Bill Mattingly, his partner, told us he and Arpaio went undercover, passing themselves off as pimps who had imaginary junkie whores, and they would buy heroin for these whores who did not exist. To play these roles, they tooled around in fancy cars that authorities had seized from suspected crooks. Arpaio smoked a cigar and dressed in flashy sports coats. He purchased $5 nickel bags of heroin for the imaginary whores, after which he and Mattingly placed the low-level dealer into the back of the car and threatened years of prison if the dealer didn't name his supplier. If you're a real good liar, you are a real good undercover agent, Mattingly told us. Back at the office, Arpaio typed up the reports late into the night. By then, he had a wife. In 1957, he and Ava Lamb, a clerical worker he'd met in Washington, were married. Ava was an aspiring hairdresser and found Arpaio to be a little, quote, a little Italian cutie, end quote. Mattingly thought Ava was sweet and pretty, and he worried that Arpaio ignored his wife and spent too much time away from her. He would sometimes say, "Joe, go back home to Ava. It's really late." Early in their marriage, Ava asked her husband to call her every night, just so she wouldn't worry. "I don't want to sit and worry. I only want to know you're safe. I don't care what you're doing, where you are. I want to know you're safe. That's all," she told us. She recalled telling her husband. He called, and she never complained again about his long hours. Ava didn't mind that her husband wasn't much help caring for their first child. Her husband only babysat once and never washed a dish, cooked, or made a bed, she told us. He was too busy. He had to sleep when he was off because he did work. He worked a lot. He worked a lot of hours, she told us. And then she added, "It's okay."
Wow, Terry, for that recent history that we're still living. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. I forgot to mention, can I mention that I had a marvelous co-author, Jude Jaffe-Block. I just wanted to make that really clear. I didn't do this alone.
Terrific. I'm going to turn to you, Richard, now. Richard Ruelas is an Arizona native who's worked at the Arizona Republic and its sister paper, the Phoenix Gazette. Shout out for the Phoenix Gazette. Since 1994, he's covered all manner of stories over the years. Besides his investigative role, he also keeps tabs on the Arizona wine industry, which I'd like to learn more about, maybe later. He's authored 2 books about the legendary Phoenix children's program, The Wallace and Ladmo Show, including Thanks for Tuning In. Richard.
And I never did a reading either, because when the book came out, Wallace was still with us, and everyone just wanted to talk to Wallace. The main character of this book is Wallace. This is a television show I grew up watching, and if you were in Phoenix before 1989, so did you. It was incredibly popular, and one of the faults of growing up with it is having to explain it to people who didn't grow up with it. So imagine like Boffo or Bozo the Clown, written by Jon Stewart. It was very funny. It was very topical. It wasn't always nice. People have memories of how great, wholesome the show was. It was not. And after doing the first book, which was like a coffee table sort of retrospective, a lot of pictures in it, there was a story to be done about Wallace, the man who left a very cushy life in Bronxville, New York, and decided to risk it all to come out to Phoenix to start a TV show. And so we'll start with an origin story of the show's villain. Wallace had the idea for a villain, someone who'd be the enemy of Ladmo. Ladmo's villain needed to be another kid, a brat, an anti-Ladmo. And as soon as that thought struck him, the character fell into place, including the name Gerald. Wallace gave Gerald all the personality traits he heard his parents mock growing up in Bronxville. Gerald was spoiled. Gerald was a braggart. Gerald was snobby. Gerald never worked hard for anything. The world was handed to him on a silver platter. He was the perfect foil for Ladmo, who came across as an unassuming innocent. The legend went that Gerald was the nephew of Dick Rawls, the station manager, and that Rawls ordered Wallace find a place for Gerald on the show, or else the show would be canceled. Wallace explained this to viewers one Tuesday. The boss's nephew was going to start appearing on the show. His name was Gerald, and he hoped all the kids liked him. Gerald was very smart and educated, Wallace explained, and maybe could bring some culture to the show. Gerald walked out with a wild mop of curly blonde hair and a shirt with a fancy ruffled collar. He ingratiated himself to Wallace. He was very polite, even going so far as to call him Mr. Wallace. But it was obvious right away he was not going to get along with Ladmo. After Gerald's introduction, Wallace began touting the big 4th of July show that weekend at Papago Plaza. Gerald went into convulsions. He told Wallace he'd go, but he wasn't going to be happy about it. He looked into the camera and read a list of rules for all the little twerps out there. Do not speak to Gerald. Do not yell at Gerald from a distance. Do not try to touch Gerald. Gerald was on 3 more times that week. Each time he protested going to that Saturday show. Each time he bemoaned the idea of being around so many twerps. He even said he was going to try to cancel the fireworks show. Gerald appeared in public for the first time, July 4, 1963. Wallace expected some response. After all, everyone likes to boo a villain, and Gerald was a great villain. But no one anticipated the ire kids had built up against Gerald. If anyone had, they would have hired more security. As soon as Gerald stepped on the stage at Papago Plaza, the kids started booing. Some started waving signs. Gerald came on stage holding a court order from another uncle, a judge, who ordered the fireworks show stopped. Ladmo ripped it up to the delight of the kids, but they still kept booing. Then they started throwing stuff, like pickles, grapefruits. Mike Condello, a guitarist, watched a chunk of watermelon fly past Gerald and smack right into his brand new Fender amplifier. The kids rushed the stage. Their weight collapsed it. Gerald made a break for it. He dashed off the stage and into the KPHO pickup truck. He locked the doors before the kids converged. Pat McMahon, still full-on in Gerald character, started taunting the kids through the truck window, sticking his tongue out at them and making funny faces. He did this because he thought he was safe. Then he stopped doing this when the kids started rocking the truck back and forth. Everyone else was standing on what was left of the stage watching the scene deteriorate. Ladmo, aghast, turned his eyes briefly from the mob scene to look at Wallace. What he saw in Wallace's eyes wasn't fear or surprise. It was pure joy. Wallace leaned into Ladmo and whispered, "I think we're on to something." Condello looked to Wallace. He was looking for reassurance. Maybe Wallace would get on the microphone and tell the kids to calm down, that this was all for fun. But Condello saw that Wallace was downright giddy. They caught each other's eyes. Wallace mouthed to Condello, "It's working."
Wow, Richard. So those in the audience who have never seen Wallace and Ladmo now, I know, are convinced they're going to be on YouTube this afternoon trying to look it up. I'd like to think of this event, or most journalism events, as you've described, largely nice and wholesome, but not entirely. So we're looking to you all. So Jeremy and Maren, I'm going to turn to you now. I'm going to ask you to describe your book and your goals in writing it, and read what you like. And Jeremy, let's turn to you. Jeremy Duda is a reporter for Axios Phoenix. He's a native of Phoenix, U of A graduate, and a longtime Arizona politics reporter. Before joining Axios in 2022, he worked for the Arizona Mirror, Arizona Capital Times, the Daily Herald of Provo, Utah, and the Hobbs News-Sun of Hobbs, New Mexico. He's the author of, and he will read from, If This Be Treason, The American Rogues and Rebels Who Walked the Line Between Dissent and Betrayal. Jeremy.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I guess the easiest way to explain what my book's about is kind of the difference between treason as it's written in the Constitution. It's the only crime that's actually defined in the Constitution, and treason in the more rhetorical sense, which is kind of how we all hear it used much more often. I think we all up here know what it's like to be accused of being treasonous or traitors to the country. Kind of happens more often than it probably should. But the concept of the book was people who were accused of being treasonous or being traitors to the country, or betraying the country, but who did not quite meet that definition in the Constitution of treason, which is taking up arms against the United States or providing aid or comfort to America's enemies, which is generally considered to mean enemies in wartime. And so, unlike some of the other books people have written up here, my book does not have one character. It's 12 chapters. They're self-contained vignettes of different episodes in American history, starting from the 1790s, going up through Iran-Contra in the 1980s. And each of these individual chapters do have some fascinating characters. Some of them very well known to people. One chapter is about Richard Nixon. As I mentioned, there's a chapter about Iran-Contra, people who are pretty well known probably to all of us here. Other chapters about people who are fascinating, kind of unknown people in American history. Probably the most fascinating was a guy named William Walker, who an American who conquered Nicaragua and temporarily set himself up as kind of the mercenary leader of Nicaragua in the 1850s. It was called filibustering. It was strangely common back in those days, and these folks were kind of like the celebrities of the American life in the 1850s. But the passage I'm going to read is about a different episode that I, as a longtime history buff, I'd never heard of this law. It's called the Smith Act. It was passed in 1940. It was set up to basically go after communists, and during the war it was used against American Nazis as well. And it was designed to, made it a crime to plot to be part of an organization that was plotting to overthrow the government. And there was a conspiracy provision that said if you were a member of such an organization, they could use that against you and the other members and charge you with a conspiracy to overthrow the government. And so as Harry Truman came under fire after World War II, and his domestic political enemies were accusing him of being soft on communism, his administration kind of dusted off this law that hadn't been used much and used it to go after members of the American Communist Party. And kind of one of the reasons I wrote this chapter, and I'm choosing to read this here, is I think this is kind of an important concept of the book, is that oftentimes the targets of people who are accused of being treasonous or betraying the country are not necessarily the most sympathetic folks you can find. Some of the people in this book are very sympathetic. Members of the American Communist Party, probably not so much, but still people who have constitutional rights, as we all do. Conflict with the communists abroad fueled persecution at home. America's attitude towards communism had never been anything but hostile, despite the easing of tensions during the war. After all, the communist philosophy contrasted so vividly with what are often considered the deepest ideological foundations of American society. But in the immediate post-war years, post-World War II, communism came to be viewed as an existential threat to the United States and the American way of life. The authorities responded accordingly and in some of the harshest terms possible. President Harry Truman found himself under increasing pressure to eradicate the communist menace at home and was eager to fend off Republican attacks that he and the Democrats were soft on communism. Though Truman rejected some of the greater excesses of the anti-communist hysteria that had gripped the nation, he vetoed the Internal Security Act of 1950, though Congress was able to override that. Something had to be done. For many Americans, loyalty oaths and even some of the more severe measures taken by the Truman administration just wouldn't cut it. In 1948, Attorney General Tom Clark asked the FBI to help him build a case against the Communist Party of the United States. Fortunately for him, the FBI's fiercely anti-communist director, J. Edgar Hoover, had been doing so for years. Hoover initiated an investigation in 1945, shortly before the war ended, into the, quote, illegal status and activities of American communists. By the time he turned over the fruits of that investigation to the Department of Justice in 1948, the file totaled 1,850 pages. Intent on prosecuting the communist leaders but struggling with the question of what law they could use as the basis of their case, the Justice Department considered using a number of other anti-communist laws, but none provided the framework they needed. The lack of evidence that the defendants were under the direct control of the Soviet Union or that they engaged in military activities ruled out some of the more obvious answers. Despite a lack of evidence that the defendants had actually plotted to overthrow the government, the Justice Department, at the FBI's urging, settled on the Smith Act as its weapon of choice. Though they couldn't demonstrate that the defendants were actively plotting against the government, the prosecutors didn't actually need to. Thanks to the Smith Act's conspiracy provision, they needed only to convince a jury that the defendants conspired to do so at some undetermined point in the future. On July 20, 1948, a federal grand jury in New York issued its indictments against the top 12 leaders of the CPUSA. The defendants represented the upper echelon of the CPUSA. Eugene Dennis had served as the party's general secretary since 1945. Benjamin Davis, the lone communist on the New York City Council, kind of a fascinating historical tidbit there, ran the party's legislative committee. John Gates served as the editor of the Daily Worker. Gilbert Greene, Gus Hall, John Thompson, and John Winter chaired the communist parties of Illinois, Ohio, New York, and Michigan, respectively. All right, that's a lot of names. I'm going to skip over that part. Though it was the defendants who would be in the dock, it was their party that was really on trial. Prosecutors devoted the overwhelming majority of the time to proving that the CPUSA advocated to overthrow the government. Once that was established, the defendant's guilt could not be in doubt. The FBI's goal was made clear in an internal memo in 1948, quote, prosecution of party officials and responsible functionaries under the Smith Act would in turn result in a judicial precedent being set that the Communist Party, as an organization, is illegal.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Appreciate that. And finally, last but certainly not least, Maren Showkier. Did I pronounce that correctly? Wow. I won't try it a second time. But Maren is a longtime Arizona Republic reporter, editor and co-author of Yoga and Wisdom at Work and Authentic Conversations, Moving from Manipulation to Truth and Commitment. She has more than 20 years experience organizing, structuring, and managing newspaper content, including daily breaking coverage, award-winning narrative journalism, and investigative projects. She is a freelance writer and editor focused on helping people develop, clarify, and communicate content and connect with their identified audience. Shout out for editors. Specializing in helping writers maintain their voice while delivering their key messages concisely, crisply, and compellingly. And Maren, a special thanks to you for bringing health and mindfulness to the workplace and to the profession of journalism, which, well, we're waiting. Give it to us.
Well, thank you. It sounds like you visited my website. I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you for your moderation, and Michelle. And I'm delighted to be here and see you all here. I have to. He mentioned the first book. I have to. This came out of the. This came out of the first book, Authentic Conversations. My late husband, Jamie Showkier. When I arrived here in Phoenix in 2005. I was jobless and homeless. I had just been a Knight Fellow journalist in South America teaching journalism. And I was sort of thinking about transitioning out of my newspaper that offered me my old job back in Florida. I met Jamie. He was looking for someone to help him write a book. I began working for him. We fell in love along the way, got married, and we published Authentic Conversations as part of our business consulting business. That was redundant. An editor would have caught that. This book sprang out of my own practice. When I was jobless and homeless, I took a yoga teacher training class because I had practiced yoga for a long time. And during that class, I was struck by two things. One is I had never heard of the yoga philosophy. I didn't know there was a philosophy behind it. I just thought it was just being able to touch your toes and do a down dog or a cat cow. And it was beautiful. It changed my life. And the other thing was how much the principles and concepts I was learning in the yoga teacher training overlapped with what I was learning of Jamie's work. They were very compatible. So when I was taking a second round of yoga teacher training, I had this idea in Shavasana, which is basically a nap at the end of class.
Best position ever.
Yeah, it's the best part. About, I wish I would have had these principles when I worked as a journalist and as a reporter and as an editor and a manager. And then I was like, hey, maybe I could write yoga principles for work. And that's how this came about. I'm going to read to you. So there's actually 8 limbs of yoga. I won't bore you with it. You can buy the book if you're interested. But the physical practice is it's the 3rd limb, and it's one of 8. And the 4th limb is pranayama, which is a breathing practice. And it's pretty much in the news these days, breathing and mindfulness and all that stuff. But it's my favorite because it links the physical practice of yoga to the mental practices of meditation and focus and inner awareness, and the spiritual practice, which is called absorption. And I'm going to read to you, I actually interview people who were in professions who used yoga practices at work, including a police officer, which was fascinating. She was also a yoga teacher, and one of the basic principles of yoga is, nonviolence. So it was really fun interviewing her about how she used these yoga practices in her job. So pranayama, you live because you breathe. Your breath fills you with the life force. Pranayama is about exploiting and harnessing the energetic force through attention to your breath. A focus on breathing is an integral part of an on-the-mat practice and can definitely make a contribution to your work life as well. Thich Nhat Hanh says, breath is the bridge that connects life to consciousness, which unites your body to your thoughts. It is a preparation and foundational to effective meditation. Although you can learn all kinds of techniques associated with pranayama, the one thing you always need to do is be mindful of your breath. pranayama is also useful for helping you alter your emotional and mental states that can get in the way of good work. Mindful breathing allows you to decelerate when you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed. It can calm an agitated or angry mind. And when you're feeling lethargic and dull, mindful breathing techniques can help you restore energy. Lacey, who works as a police officer in Las Vegas, credits pranayama with her ability to stay focused and aware, even in the most extreme circumstances. She considers it a life-saving technique, and she is not talking metaphorically. She recalls one incident when she and her partner were forced from their patrol car after a gunman put several bullets into the door. They began to chase him down an alley as he continued to shoot at them. As Lacey ran, she was shouting into her radio, ordering backup help, and trying to direct other officers to their location. All the while, the suspect continued to shoot. Then her gun jammed, and she started feeling panicky. Lacey realized she was losing her breath. "You're already putting a strain on your cardiovascular system by running," she said. "And your sympathetic responses kicked into overdrive. I could observe in my mind that my breathing was becoming erratic, and I knew it was affecting my mental state. I had to slow it down if I wanted to do my job and not get killed." As she ducked behind a wall to fix her gun, I could actually see my mind running away from me. The training I've had in pranayama was invaluable in that situation because I could get control of my breath quickly, which evens out my mind, she said. Once I had my breath, I was able to quickly fix the gun, continue the chase, and get my shots off with precision. Can I just say one more thing? Sorry, Tim.
No, please, Maren.
I just want to say that as an 8-year-old, I got to see a live Wallace and Lamo show, and I got to go up on stage and rat Gerald out because he was trying to get Lamo in trouble.
Wow. These are the moments we look for. This is authorial gold, people. So thank you. So snaps for all our authors. Come on, once more. Excellent. So I have two things to say to the audience. First of all, how many of you out there are yourselves book authors? Raise your hand. Keep your hands up. How many people out there are writers? Snaps for you. And talk to Pen America. They're your people. And second of all, for the audience, get your credit cards ready, okay? Just get them ready. Second of all, I have something. I'm saying, how many are lawyers? Yeah, I'll buy you Maren's book, and we can work on it together. We can workshop it. And we're going to move into the questions now for the authors. And first of all, I'll say, you guys are like dead on time. Like, it's frightening how you did that. It's like, almost like journalists know about deadlines. Very impressive. Christine?
I was like, let's keep it going.
Yes.
Tim.
And so I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to ask you to hear the ground rules that I've already told them. If they hear an answer that they're going to give, you don't have to give it again. And if you can keep it brief, but sparkling, fantastic. Anecdotes are nice. Bland statements of generalities are not. So there you go. No pressure. I'm going to go all the way back. I'm going to start by asking if did you want to be a book author and write a book when you were younger, or is that a goal that occurred much later in your journalism career? Anybody can start. Jeremy.
I'm holding the microphone, so I guess I'll start. Surprisingly, I've always been a very voracious reader, going back to when I was a teenager, and surprisingly, that wasn't really something I'd thought of much until one day I was sitting around having drinks with a friend of mine who had published a few books, and started talking about how much I really wanted to do that in my career. Right? Oh yeah, which as I have subsequently learned, but I actually started working on I didn't really know what I was going to write, and was kicking around some ideas, and actually finally came up with another idea, which has not yet come to fruition, but hopefully will, I think, very soon. But then the opportunity for this came along. It was actually a publisher's idea who came up with it. They were looking for someone to write it, and my friend introduced us and said, "Hey, this is the guy who can write this book for you." And a year or so later, here it is.
Pro tip: get good friends. Yes. Nice. Christina.
Thank you. Like Jeremy, I also have always loved reading. And growing up, I always loved reading and writing, but I never saw anybody who was ever an author. I never met anybody who took the career path of being a writer. I did see reporters on TV, and I heard them on the radio, and I read them in the newspapers and in magazines, and so I think that's probably what steered me to journalism. But I've always loved mysteries, and I've always loved reading and writing, and ultimately, there was no aha moment, but one key moment was reading the first in the Ali Reynolds series by J.A. Jance, who I adore. She has 2 Arizona-based mysteries, one in northern Arizona, one in southern Arizona. The first of her Ali Reynolds series, which is actually based on her favorite Tucson anchor, whose contract was not renewed because, well, they don't renew contracts for various reasons, but let's just say she was over 40. So J.A. was very annoyed with that because that was her favorite anchor. So she created this character, which she made a former L.A. anchor who moved to the Sedona area to sort of help her parents with their restaurant. So as she's driving on Interstate 17, there's a reference to I-17 and Northern Avenue. And I went, oh my gosh, I know that. Like, that's the first time I ever read a book that I connected to that way. And so that really planted the seed. And then voila, 15 years later, here I am.
There's a theme here. I have loved books and worshiped book authors since I was just learned to read, and actually did want to write books. And I was going to be the great American novelist in high school. That was my goal. I went into journalism because my family is riddled with teachers, and I was just, I'll be darned if I'm going to be a teacher. So I went into journalism. It was just, I miss the newsroom every day, even though I've been out of it for a long time. And I didn't think so much about writing a book if I hadn't met Jamie and he hadn't needed help and I hadn't fallen in love with him. Who knows what would have happened? But it's so much fun and so rewarding to write books. I'm just kidding about the fun part. Yeah, I actually did want to be an author, or at least a writer, from a very young age.
Oh, I'm supposed to. Okay. Well, we've already talked about me growing up on a cattle ranch. No TV, lots of books. My parents had the family room, was called the book room, and I read, and always aspired to write books. I thought that was the highest calling. I didn't know if I had it in me, but I always aspired to it as sort of the most important thing I could do. So, always wanted to be an author.
I spent a lot of time in the Tempe Public Library and around books all the time. Libraries are great. But no, I didn't think, I didn't know how you became an author. And weirdly, although we had 2 newspapers delivered to our house every day, I didn't know that I could write for the newspaper. One of the missions I do, I'm part of a group called the Arizona Latino Media Association. We reach out to high schools and try to reach me as a high school student to say, come on in, go to college, you can do this. But yeah, I didn't know there was a path until someone was looking to Wallace to do the coffee table book, The History of the Show, and I had just done a story for the state press, the Arizona State University college newspaper. And
There's a little micro.
And he said,
I saw the little microaggression there against Jeremy, I think, so.
And he said, I know a guy. And so he asked me as a college student to work on that book. I will say this about the University of Arizona. They do have an excellent jobs program. Every graduate gets a map to Phoenix.
This, the streaming numbers, Richard, the streaming numbers are through the roof now. Thank you. Very nice. Very nice. So you each have, in your original journalism job, you've covered countless stories, and many of them could convey volumes of information. How did the topic of your book speak to you so deeply that you thought, this could be a book? And Richard, you kind of touched on it, so maybe Terry, what do you think?
Okay, well...
Take us to the moment when you thought, hey, there's a book here.
I was sitting in the courtroom covering the Melendrez trial, and there was the possibility that Arpaio might go to jail. And there was another reporter sitting in the courtroom with me named Jude Jaffe Block, and we were the only two people in God's entire creation who thought this might be a book. So we banded together and wrote the book. So
I feel like I told my story. I met my husband. I had Shavasana.
Love that. Jeremy.
I guess I'll live vicariously through my editor for a moment, since, as I mentioned before, this was the editor's idea, and he reached out to my friend who he'd worked with on another book and wanted him to write the book, and he'd just taken a new job and said, I don't have time, but let me put you in touch with my friend who wants to write a book. And the concept was inspired by, this would have been back in 2015, by, there's a law called the Logan Act, which dates back to the 1790s and is ostensibly bans American citizens from being kind of freelance diplomats, from kind of trying to negotiate with foreign powers and leaders on their nation's behalf. And it would never actually be enforceable. Almost no one's ever, I don't think only twice has anyone ever been charged with it. No one's ever actually gone to trial. It would probably be found unconstitutional if it ever happened. But it's the basis of a lot of allegations, like the ones that are the kind of the focus of the book. And so this is what kind of inspired the idea. And the guy wanted 10 to 12 kind of individual chapters on these kinds of episodes. And from there, I said, all right, well, one will obviously be the Logan Act, but as a lifelong history buff, I said, okay, I can come up with the others. And he's kind of let me run loose and kind of figure out where I wanted to go with it. And my lifetime of reading history books really paid off in a way that I didn't think it ever would.
Wow, that's great. So it's amazing how those 1800s laws keep having an effect today. Anyway. That's a different session.
Tim, can we do
Christine.
an unscripted question up here?
Yeah.
Okay, on this panel, raise your hand if you're a Jeopardy viewer.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you're Wheel of Fortune. That's the difference, people. You guys are like way smart sounding. And here's me. I'm like, I have Wheel of Fortune in my book. I love it so much. Listening to Jeremy, I'm like having please don't quiz me, Jeremy. I love your stuff and it's so interesting, but you're freaking me out because you're so smart.
She tried to get on Jeopardy. I was on the call list. Never made it, but
Wait,
never made it, unfortunately.
Jeremy, I also tried out for Wheel of Fortune, so we're both losers.
And if we can start going to our questions, because I have
Yeah,
a couple.
note to self, shorter questions for Christina.
I was
I
short at the
noticed-
beginning, remember?
You wrote in the first person.
Mm-hmm.
We write as journalists always in the third person, and I would think if I ever made the transition to fiction, I would assume just out of instinct you write in the third. Did you start writing in the third, or did you know it was going to be first right away?
I always did first person. And you know what's weird is that my character, Jolene, is a reporter in Phoenix, and I was so, I don't want to get all weird because I don't even know the right words, but I became her as I was writing so much that I would take on some things. She's afraid of dogs. I love dogs. I'm not afraid of my own dog. But when I would go for walks or ride my bike or run, I found myself crossing the street to avoid dogs. So it was very odd. But I don't know, it came first person and present tense as well.
Very quick for Terry, too. So many words have been written about Arpaio. And when you mention you get the idea to write it in book form, you have new information in your book. And I'm wondering whether even just the idea that you're writing it not for today, tomorrow or next week or next month, but for timeless, did that change your perspective on the types of questions you asked of your subjects?
Oh my gosh, that's such a long. First of all, I write in the first person in my journalism. So sometimes, and I think it just matters. Sometimes in journalism, it's important for the writer to be in the narrative because it's part of the narrative. And sometimes, as an observer on a quest, it is a nice writing device, and you can still be, pretty neutral, but you can be an observer on the quest and take the readers with you on that quest, I like that device. Okay. I myself, and Jude as well, had written many, 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 many words on Arpaio. And one of the real hard things about writing this book was that some of it was boring to us because we'd written about it so much, and so many people had written about it so much. But we knew that we were writing, so we envisioned the reader as a very curious, smart person who didn't know anything about our pile. So we incorporated the new stuff with the old stuff. We have a lot of new stuff, but that's basically how we did it. And it didn't change us asking the questions, because I've been asking our pile those history questions forever. Like, he just, you know, he has his answers. But no. So does that answer everything?
I think so.
Okay. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Ruelas, I like the question. This is not a moderator audition. I'm just saying.
Back to you, Tim.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's not fair. Truly, I wanted them to speak to each other, so I really appreciate you doing that. That's great. So I'm gonna exactly. I know I'm back at journalists, effing journalists. So let me ask all of you: was writing a book easier or far harder than you had imagined?
I was terrified when I had to write a book, but I will say that despite the terror, it was much easier than I imagined as well. It's this exact same process, at least it was for me. Find interesting people to tell interesting stories about the things that you want, that will help you move your message out into the world. Envision who your audience is. All of the chops that you learn in daily journalism were absolutely, for me anyway, in both books, essential to writing a book. So it was terrifying, but once I got started, I was like, oh, well, this is just like long form journalism, and I know how to do this.
I guess for me, I'm thinking there was no system or safety net. I know when I'm writing for the newspaper that there's a team of people around to make sure that I don't mess it up, that are going to check the grammar and check the facts. And I was like, oh, no one is fact-checking my book. That's me and Wallace who are going to make sure that it's accurate. And Wallace was very intent on making the book not only accurate, but like warts and all. Like he had one particular vice, but he wanted to make sure that it was his story, and he didn't want it shielded. He allowed things to go. But I think that was the unique thing, is that there's I found no real safety net, no system to make sure like everything in here is right.
I forgot the question. What's the
Hard to
question?
write a book.
Oh, is it
Hard
hard
to write a
to
book.
Yeah.
Hard, easy.
Yes is the
You discuss.
Oh, okay.
Hard or easy?
Every literary project, every story I've ever written, I always assume will be easier than it ends up being. It's always harder. So that's my answer. Harder, harder, harder.
Jeremy.
Say expected it to be difficult, so I don't think I was caught off guard by that. But I think I did not have a proper grasp of how labor intensive it is, especially when you have a pretty demanding full-time job. Thank God I didn't have kids yet. What I do now is I'm trying to write something else, and it's not the same, but it is very labor intensive, and so that took a little bit of getting used to.
Christina, easy, hard? Did it cut into Wheel of Fortune? What was
It
it?
absolutely cut into Wheel of Fortune. Let me tell you. So the short answer is yes, it was very hard. The longer answer is I was very naive. I thought, I write every day in my day job. How hard can it be to write a book? And it is hard. Maren, I had to start breathing as you were talking about how fun it was. I was like, no, it was not. It's fun now looking back, but yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I knew what I was doing, and I clearly didn't, which is why one of the reasons it took 15 years for me to get here. So it's a whole different beast, and I feel much better now having gone through it. But yeah, you have to learn how to write, at least crime fiction. Yeah, fiction is very different from nonfiction, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Very nice. So if I might, you've all mentioned, I think in passing, the benefit of being a journalist when you decided to write a book. Were there any deficits? Were there any journalistic traits or skills you had to kind of sideline or minimize in order to write a book length work? Were you editing yourself constantly every 300 words and having not to do that? What is it like?
Well, I think in my case, and it's different. I think it'll be different for a lot of the people up here who were dealing with very contemporary subjects. Most of the incidents I was dealing with happened. Everyone involved died. 100, 200 years ago. So, as a journalist, my instinct is to reach out to the people involved and talk to them. Say, what happened? Tell me about this. I cannot do that to somebody who died in 1870. So, but fortunately, as a journalist, I'm used to doing a lot of very intensive research, and this really pushed that to the limits. It was hardcore research all the time, full weekends just spent with entire days spent at the ASU library, just hunkered over a pile of books, taking notes. And so the research skills I developed over a career as a journalist, I think, really paid dividends there.
Richard, did you catch that? He gave an ASU plug.
Yes.
He did. So,
There's books in the ASU library? I never had to go. I never had to walk into the ASU library. Yeah.
Jeremy and I were talking before we started, and he and I are very different writers. Clearly, our books are very different. But he is among the 90%. I've heard this figure, though as a reporter, I should probably verify it before I go spouting it off, which I just did. But I've heard it from more than one expert in the publishing industry that most authors overwrite and then in the editing process have to cut. And I'm the opposite. I am what I nicely call a sparse writer, because of my journalism, because in broadcast journalism, it is just get to the point. And so I get to the point, and they're like, that ain't a book. You need to add. So that was my challenge.
There were a couple of things for me. One was we chose not to use real names in the book because, thanks to lawyers, it was daunting to get all of the permission and the rights and all of that stuff. So we sort of used not real names, and that was hard for me. I wanted to use real names so much. But the other thing that was kind of fun was my co-writer, my late husband, was not a writer. And so we, especially on the first book, we had a process where he would write a chapter based on his workbook, and he would give me about 14 or 15 pages, and I would give him back 7. And so that was kind of hard because I was afraid it might impact our marriage. But happily, it did not.
Now we're digging in. So, good to see you. This is a two-part question, and I have to, it's because of my lawyer training, I guess, two-part question. So this actually came from a journalist who is also an accomplished book writer himself. And he asked me, and it's an excellent question. The first part you probably will be able to answer. The second part you choose not to. The first part is, please describe how you actually got your books into print and got book deals. How did that happen? And the second is, how's the money? Especially compared to your journalism day job. So.
You wish to start?
Money in either?
Do you want me to talk?
Yeah, how'd you get a book deal?
Okay, so the first book that I wrote happened just exactly as yours did, Jeremy. The publisher came to me, so that was pretty easy. And I hired an agent only to work out the contract so that, because I didn't know anything about book contracts. The second one, we passed around to all the major publishers. We passed the book proposal around, and they all passed on it. These are the big-time publishers. So then we had the option of going with a university press or trying to go with the next tier of publishers. And we got an offer from University of California Press, which is a very, very, very good press, so we went with that. The money on the first one was good, the money on the first book. On the second book, we got fellowships, and that funded the book because we got a very tiny advance. So we broke even on the second one, and the money on the first one was, decent. So that's my story.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your candor. Anybody else? If you want to get into
I did not get a book deal.
Is this blow in Las Vegas money or what?
I did not get a book deal. We were talking to the University of Arizona. There's a lot of University of Arizona, the University of Arizona Press. And it wasn't academic enough. They liked the story, but it wasn't like written with footnotes and stuff. I see Jeremy's book has a bunch of footnotes. Yeah, this was written more like a narrative story, so it wasn't academic enough for him. They agreed to distribute it, but the publisher ended up being Dan Harkins.
Oh, wow.
He credits Wallace for starting Harkins Theaters. For he would go on the show to promote stuff, the Love Bug and all that stuff. So he credits the show for the creation of Harkins Theaters. And so he said, if you're having trouble finding a deal, I'll pay for the publishing. We made a business deal. He was sure it was going to make money. It did. So Dan got paid back and got a cut. So I wrote a check to Dan every month when we got sales. We did sell it ourselves for a while, and then once U of A put it in, it came into books, and it's kind of dwindled down. It's been 20 years, so it's kind of stopped selling. But for a while, yeah, it was okay. Wallace wanted to sell it, and we were going to every bookstore in the metro area. He also wanted to sell it at the state fair, which I thought, okay, we'll go to the state fair one day when you're having the big stage show. No, he wanted to go to the state fair every day of the state fair to sell a book. It would have sold better had it been deep fried. I have not been back to the Arizona State Fair since that year that I went every single day.
Wow.
2 weeks, Richard.
Oh my God.
It did sell at the fair.
How did you have more humor in your voice? I don't care if you're discussing going out to the bathroom. You have a gift. And do you do any humorous writing?
I'm going to repeat the question, so make sure we hear it. So the question is, Richard Ruelas, who did not need to be told this, has a gift. He has a humorous voice. Do you do any humorous writing? Only kidding, Richard.
My editors say all of my writing is humorous. No. I mean, for a while I had a Metro column. I used to be somebody in this town, and I still do some features where it comes out, but yeah, not so much. My wife gets to hear all the jokes.
So modern day, as many people in the audience probably know, modern day book publishing is different than it was a long time ago. Have you had to become your own best self-promoter and self-marketer, or is your publisher helping with that?
I will speak to that just because I currently, in my job now, I am a ghostwriter and editor, so I help a lot of other people work on books. And the publishing industry is going through everyone knows this, major disruption. And so when we were right before self-publishing became a big thing. And we had a really unique experience. We wrote the manuscript first. We sent it to the publisher that we wanted to work with. He loved it. He bought it. And they didn't give advances. So did we make a lot of money? I still get royalty checks, but maybe they might pay for like one day. If I had a mortgage, they would pay one mortgage payment a year. So if you're writing a book to make money, you're probably not going to. That's not why I wrote either of my books. I felt like I had a message I wanted to get in the world. So, but there are so many ways to publish a book now. Book proposals, I don't know how you feel about them, or if did anyone have to do a book proposal besides me?
Yeah.
There's nothing I hate more than a book proposal.
Yeah.
And I will say they are so valuable. They are so valuable because they force you to think about your big idea, who your audience is, what's your sales plan, because publishers are not going to pick you up if they don't think they can make some money. So I would say if you're thinking about writing a book, put a lot of care and love into a book proposal. And also there's so many ways to publish now, hybrid publishing, self-publishing. I think some of the stigma from that has lessened quite a bit. And some people get really lucky and make a lot of money that way. Do you think to add?
I did have to be kind of my own biggest self-promoter. The publishing house that my book was with did not do a lot to kind of promote it myself. I unfortunately did not have an agent, so it was kind of up to me sending out a lot of solicitations to local folks who, fortunately, I know personally, a lot of them could say, "Hey, how'd you like to have me on your show to talk about my book?" Fortunately, had some luck with that. Occasionally, had some luck with the folks. Out-of-state folks, national folks, and at least locally, anytime the word treason pops up in the news, people at least reach out to me. So it does help being perceived as the local expert on a particular topic.
So my book, Off the Air, was just published March 26th. Somebody told me the last thing I did that I didn't hold it up, so that's why I'm doing that. March 26th it was published, and I'm really fortunate that that my publisher has a really brilliant marketing and public relations team. You still have to, no matter what, you still have to hustle if you're going to sell and you want to sell books, because it's not a charity, it's a business. And if your books don't sell, you're not going to get another one. So I had to have sort of a come to Jesus meeting with myself, actually more than once. And I credit Shonda Rhimes, name dropping, not because I know her. I just discovered her actually about 2 months before my publication date. So Shonda Rhimes, if you don't know her, is like a huge powerhouse in Hollywood. She's behind Grey's Anatomy, How to Get Away with Murder, Bridgerton. I know I'm missing a zillion others, but she's like a phenom, big time. So she wrote a memoir that came out like 7 or 8 years ago. Like I said, I was late to the party because I just discovered it about 4 months ago. So her memoir is called Year of Yes, and it is about her doing things that made her uncomfortable. And the Year of Yes comes from, it was a Thanksgiving and her sister asked her to do something which would have been fun, and her response was no. And her sister said, "You never say yes to anything." And Shonda said she was going to make this the Year of Yes. She did some really uncomfortable things. It's a really great book, such a great book that not only did I read it, but then I got the audio version and listened to it as I was walking. And then my launch week, I re-listened to chapter 10, which is thank you, smile, and shut up. So when someone gives you a compliment, instead of saying, "Oh, I got this on sale," just thank you, smile, shut up. So I really, seriously, I would not be, because I had to do some major things that had I not read that book twice and really absorbed it, I wouldn't have been able to do, because you've got to hustle if this is what you care about. And I didn't want to be a one and done. Like, I want a Phoenix-based mystery series to succeed. So I'm putting myself out there. Thank you. And I'm sweating up here while I'm doing it.
We're all sweating, honey.
To the sales thing, and I guess maybe it's endemic in journalism, but the paper, the Republic, had a booth somewhere, and they said, if you wish, you could sell your book at the booth. And I go, and I'm talking people out of buying the book. I'm just saying, like, no, it's probably at the library, or you could probably wait. I'm like, it's a kind of next to me is a guy selling newspaper subscriptions and handing out comic strip umbrellas to people who woke up that day not knowing they were going to subscribe to the paper, and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, there's another way to do this. Not me. I'm not a very good salesperson.
Clearly.
No.
Absolutely. So before we turn to audience, let me ask you one more question. Friends and family, what's their response been to your bookish life, and are they commenting to you more about the book than they ever did about your writing or editing, or vice versa?
I would say so. I've got a lot of people in my family who are like me, nerds, basically, to put it politely. Jeopardy, yes, Jeopardy viewers. Yes, that is a good way to put it. History buffs. People who the kind of the audience that I was aiming at when I wrote this, people like myself. So I think there's been, know a lot of people like that. So I think the reception to that has been pretty good. But even folks who see a lot of people who aren't necessarily hardcore history buffs and wouldn't have read something like this if it hadn't been the fact that someone in their family wrote it or a close friend, very good reception. I think I wrote it in a way that is pretty engaging for folks who are like me, but even for folks who maybe aren't big history readers and just kind of picked it up because they know me. I think I got a pretty good reception from a lot of them as well.
Super quick. You write forever, never, never. Like, I think I mentioned it's 15 years ago I said I was going to write a book. So you're just in this forever on your own by yourself. And the book's going to come out, and you're going to hold it and cry, and you hope you see it in bookstores, and you hope you see it in libraries. So I try to explain that several months before publication day to people close to me, and they were like, oh, okay, yeah. And then it wasn't until actual publication date when Barbara Peters, owner of this beautiful store here, actually hosted my pre-launch the day before pub day. And I had more than one person close to me be like, wow, this is a big deal. And I was like, of course it is. I've been trying to tell you.
I will just say that because all of us grew up loving books, right? I worshipped authors. Like if someone told me they wrote a book, I remember your coworker, Paul Rubin, telling me he was going to write a book. And I was like, oh, wow, he's writing a book. And I did not get that worshipful, reverent response from friends or family when I published a book at all.
Friends, family?
Don't you want to talk?
After you.
Okay.
He likes to.
Okay, well, when I write a book, I isolate a lot because I think it's such an important mission, and it's so all-consuming. So I'm a little bit, I isolate and I get isolate-y-ish. And so my friends, want to go out and have coffee or this or that, and very often I just can't go. I have to write. And this is the case with both books. And then after the book is out, then I work really, really, really hard to rebuild those friendships and say, here I am. And almost everyone understands, but the lifestyle is simply one of isolation to get it done. And that's a sacrifice that I made.
Mom and Dad were very happy, and friends showed up at some things like this. But oddly enough, I became friends with my subject, which is weird as a kid growing up watching him on TV, that he and I became friends. So that was a really nice thing. And one of the nicest things I was able to do and still do occasionally is walk into the Tempe Public Library and type in my name in the card catalog. And it's like, ooh, it comes up.
That's cool.
Real talk. That's great. So I really have just one more question before we're going to have maybe 15 minutes of audience Q&A, so get them ready. If there's anything you want to share with us about what's next, whether it's a book or another project or an article series, whatever you're working on, let me know.
You have the next.
You said you were going to do your work on a book.
Practice that elevator speech again.
I am working on a book. I think I'm very close to finish, and hopefully pretty close to getting a deal about the about Don Bolles, the Don Bolles case, the famous journalist who was assassinated. Even an interview subject of mine for the book is in the audience. Actually, my former colleague Don Harris, who was good enough. I think the only person to have worked with both me and Don Bolles, and was good enough to talk with me for the book. And I think I'm very close to finish, and hopefully we will see that next year.
Fantastic. And let me interrupt for a second. So Jeremy, thank you very much for that. It's great to know. Our SPJ chapter for a few years now has been working hard to try to pass a bill in the legislature to get a memorial on the Capitol grounds to Don Bolles. Let's align our things. And the other idea for a book, in case you're looking for one, is I don't know if you have the Google, but there are a lot of rogues out there right now, maybe traitors. I don't know. Just an idea. Just an idea for part 2 of the book.
It came out in 2016. It'll come out a bit later.
Yeah, there are some living ones you might want to look into. They might call you back. I don't know. So, Christina.
I pulled an all-nighter Sunday because my second manuscript was due to my editor Monday morning, and it includes Don Bolles as a reference. He's not a character or anything in there, but because it's set in Phoenix, I very much want to include real Phoenix situations and people and landmarks and things like that. So Don Bolles is in there. So Tim, as you lobby the legislature next time, maybe take my book and be like, hey. And I will say, if you read off the air, the way that this ends is the way the second book will begin. So it's sort of a continuation. It was a real thing that happened in Phoenix. And it's not a spoiler. The mayor was stuck in an elevator. I'm just going to say it. Because I don't think he's really, anyway. I just like that little bit of thing. And let me give credit where credit is due, because do you guys remember Dustin Gardner? Arizona Republic reporter who's now in San Francisco. He's the one that reported on that because he had an office in City Hall, and he reported on Mayor Greg Stanton at the time, who's now our congressman, was stuck in the elevator at City Hall. And I just always remembered that. And every time I would see on city council agendas, there would be maintenance. And it just stuck in my head. And so It's mentioned in both books.
Thank you so much. And I will say that if there are a lot of reasons to read all these books, and to read Christina's in particular, and if you're a foodie, Christina has more references to actual Arizona restaurants and delicious takeout food than you can imagine. So you'll spot your favorites if you read the book. So, Richard.
I did a podcast because we discovered some cassette tapes that Don Bowles made in a locked cabinet at the Republic, and I used those cassettes to have Don Bowles in his own voice tell his own story. So if you're interested in Don Bowles, that's something. But next, I decided to do the same thing with some of the interviews I did on both books with Wallace and Ladmo, and although Pat McMahon is still with us, Pat McMahon. So in the works in the next few months will be sort of a podcast where Wallace and Ladmo get to tell the story of Wallace and Ladmo.
Fantastic.
And Richard's Don Bowles podcast was fascinating, by the way, and that has been helpful in my research as well. So,
A lot of love up here. Anybody else? Anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to turn to our wonderful audience and ask you to raise your hand and speak as loud as you can, but I'll probably repeat your question. Carrie.
So I'm curious about everyone's process. I think you alluded to, like Jeremy, you said you're in the library doing so much research and nonfiction, obviously. But what's your writing process? I was surprised that Jake Tapper wrote a fiction book. He read a lot of fiction, but he wrote it during the pandemic, and I'm like, he's full-time on CNN all the time. So what is your process for getting your writing done?
Perfect. So the question is, please describe your writing process. And honestly, if you are one of these, I get up at 5:30 to write for 3 hours, we can't be friends.
Exactly. I agree.
I had a standing interview time every Saturday morning with my subject, who didn't like being recorded and didn't like me taking notes on a laptop in front of him. So I wrote on a legal pad the notes he had, but he had the stories and he was in charge. And then, I mean, this was 20 years ago, but I had more energy, but it was just finding time and bit by bit methodically going through it. And then once we were done all the way through, editing it back.
I had a pretty the first book with Jamie, we locked ourselves away in a friend's house in Mount Shasta, California, and we wrote a rough draft in a week. So we had full time every day. I told you our editing process, and that is not normal or typical, I think, for most writers. The second,
No, it's not.
it's not, because when I wrote this book, it was so much harder. And actually, Jamie's name is on it because we wanted to be able to work together, but I did the bulk of the writing, and he is a talker. And I would literally have to leave the house. He'd say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm like, just did. So I would leave the house, and I would go work in coffee shops. And he would say to me, like, you know, they talk in coffee shops. It's noisy there. I'm like, yeah, but I don't have to listen to them. You know, I have to listen to you. So it was really haphazard and harder in the second book. There was more research to be done, more interviews to be done, and I would just do it when I could. And I had to force myself so many times to sit down and write. It wasn't, I mean, I'm so satisfied to have this book. I love it, but it was not an easy process, and I don't know if anyone here found their writing process easy. Let me know, and I'm going to hit you.
All right. Another question. Yes, right here.
So as journalists, how did you have to change your framework from keeping your audience captivated versus a 200 plus page book versus a 2-minute reader package?
Excellent question. So the question was, as a journalist, when you turn to book length works, how do you keep readers engaged, and how do you change your skills to do that, as opposed to keeping them engaged over a short news story or a short news article?
I would say two things, just because I can be fast.
Please.
Write like you're talking to a friend, make it conversational, and tell stories.
I write long anyway, so, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and I think in our line of work, I mean, like, every story should be as short as possible, but as long as it needs to be. So there's always that honing of, like, you want it, even if it's a 5,000 word story, it should be tight. You shouldn't know that it's that long. You should, after a half an hour, be like, oh, I just read all that and I missed my light rail. Like, yeah, so yeah, it.
Missed my light rail.
I don't what? I take the light rail and
Christina's like,
Phoenix.
Christina's like, that's a Phoenix. Oh, you're stealing it.
Yeah.
Rail into the next book.
But no, I mean, it always should be screamingly tight, I think.
I think too is understanding the elements of narrative and how to build suspense, how to foreshadow, understanding the telling details that make the page pop up, understanding character development, and all of this. Once you understand it, you have to report it. And so reporting for narrative is really, really important in all journalism, but particularly in books. And, you know, once you master how tension works and how to foreshadow it, I think readers will hopefully go through the whole thing. Yeah.
Beautiful. Great question. Thank you. Right there, sir.
Actually, I had a question for you, Christina. In your own personal experiences as a reporter, has collaborating with larger media networks often proved to be as difficult as they're portrayed in an excerpt?
So if we could, yeah, the question is about the excerpt that Christina read, and it's a significant element of the book, I think, but the local reporters having to interact with the national reporters who parachute in. So let's talk about
Yes,
that.
parachute in is very accurate. I mean, that's happened. I've been reporting here for more than 20 years, and we in Phoenix and in Arizona often attract national attention. And so, yeah, they do come in.
Only for good reasons.
Oh, always good. They come in, and they're the big shots in many people's opinions. And that means sources as well. So sometimes they're sort of starstruck by, ooh, it's so-and-so. Like Carrie mentioned a CNN anchor, right? She could have asked her question using me, a local person as an example, but she didn't. So there is that. And then they do come with, they have more people and more resources, and they come in to do what they need to do and leave because they're national reporters, right? They don't live here or work here. So their mission is different than ours, and sometimes it can be really frustrating because you're like, you just reported that, and that's not even at all like what it is. Or you missed this, and this, but their job is different than our job. So yeah, there's a little, do I have a grudge? I don't know. I mean, I love national news.
A poison pen headline, Christina Estes not bitter at all.
I will say this, and this is like a PEN America type of thing. But whenever I do speak to, and this comes up as people talk about the media, whenever I do speak to a national reporter who's parachuting in, we still speak the same language. Like, we still can talk, like, the job is the same, even though they have a different audience and all that. But I always find, like, yeah, they just work for a different place. But I always find, like, we get along because we're all trying to do the same thing.
Sure, make me look bad.
Yeah, and actually, may I ask?
Even though they do Bigfoot us.
May I ask Terry, since you did cover Melendres, like, and the whole story, what was your experience?
Well, I want to go back. I want to backtrack a minute to your question. 'Cause I'm a total writing nerd. You know, I love to think about exactly precisely what I'm doing. So another way to make sure that you keep readers engaged is to write your narrative arc. Just draw a diagram of the narrative arc and then put the plot lines in so the tension builds. It gets to a certain point and then it starts resolving itself. So, sorry, I'm such a word nerd. Okay.
You
Okay,
know,
what did you want?
No, I love that. I appreciate.
Melendres, national.
But I do appreciate that here we are at 4:35 or whatever, and we're still getting gems because that is so valuable. I'm not joking. As a writer, that is phenomenal. So to actually think about that on paper.
Yeah,
so, thank you.
Total. As for Melendres, I was writing for the national press.
Oh.
So.
No, she was writing accurately because she was here, right? It's different when you live in a place.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And yeah, so I was writing the story for national outlets.
All right. Alan.
Christina, is it Christina?
Yes.
Christina. You raised a very interesting point. You both get it right, the local reporter and the national parachutist.
It's the
But
context.
let me, Alan. I'm gonna. So you're gonna drive hard to a question now, right? Excellent. Yeah, do it.
How do you account for the difference, and is one of them inaccurate? A lot of the public thinks it is.
So he was asking about the difference between a national and local story when it's factually accurate. What's sort of the difference? The difference is context, right? It would be the same as if I went to another city, I parachuted in to cover something, and I'm like, well, my facts are right, but the people who live there are like, yeah, but you missed this nuance and that. So that's what I mean.
Fair enough.
I think we've all read those broad brush stories where they talk about Phoenix as a place where everyone just falls over from the heat or something. Yeah, it's
Terry,
like-
did you have something, Dan?
Yeah, I have. Whoop. Okay, but both perspectives are valid, right? I mean, we have people parachuting in who can add something that we didn't even see, and it was right in front of our nose. And then our perspective is valid as well as national. I mean, as local journalists. But I think there's room for everything. Yeah.
But it's a better story when there's conflict, Terry. Wouldn't you agree?
Very nice. And speaking of that, I give Alan a hard time. Alan is a much-loved, longtime member. He's a book author, a member of SBJ Arizona. But people ask me sometimes, my beautiful wife is here, and they ask me, your gray hair, did your two daughters give that to you? And I'm like, no, it was Alan. So, but I like to say that I did the same for Alan. So right back at you, buddy.
Tim, could you ask all the authors to hold up their books next to their face without putting their fingers on it so we can see them?
Beautiful.
Fingers.
Okay, now we have to take your picture.
This is the closest we're gonna get to paparazzi right
Right.
here.
Is it right side up? Okay, good.
Oh, look, there's my picture.
So as you can see, Alan always makes me feel at home, which means I've totally lost control. So I've got to say, the picture I just took of all of you is one I've never taken in a bookstore, so that's great. I'm going to take one more while I wait for another hand for a question. All right, let me see here. All right, you back there on the aisle. Yes.
So as a current journalist and aspiring book author, I often worry about someday having to get people to take both sides of my career seriously. Is that something that you've ever run into, or am I like making up an anxiety that shouldn't exist?
So if I could rephrase, if I could restate it, are you concerned as a journalist and as a book author that you might be seen as a dilettante in one or the other because you're dipping into both professions?
I wouldn't think so. I think it's kind of two sides of the same coin. I think it's kind of a natural, in most people's minds, it's kind of a natural transition. You're a journalist, of course, a journalist would be interested in writing a book. It's something that I think a lot of people would just kind of expect of us.
But I guess to me, it's just a sidelight. Like I never stopped really being one. But I'm curious how the person who wants to start an Arizona mystery series here feels.
I probably should have given it more thought before I did this. I was just at a book club a few nights ago, and somebody said, "Did you ask everyone's permission to be in the book?" And I was like, "No." So, but I didn't.
There are attorneys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was like, but see, it's the book nerd in me. I was like, I would love to be in somebody's book as long as I wasn't the killer or the victim. And none of them are. You know what I mean? They're not. Nothing horrible happens at their business. Like I like their food, or they were nice to me when I worked on a story. But to your point, if you're, I think it depends on what you're writing. So if you are anxious because you're writing something that's like super X-rated or something super graphic or whatever, then you might consider using a pseudonym. But otherwise, there's enough to be worried about and anxious and freak out about in the process. So
That's true.
Absolutely. I think we have time for one more question, and then I have instructions for you. Any more questions? Right here. Yes.
Something you said that kind of stuck with me was that when you are in your writing process, you like to isolate. But it made me think about writer's block, and if it's almost better to surround yourself with people and out into the world to be inspired by your writing, or is it just like a personal preference?
restate.
Terry,
Could you
Yes.
repeat the question?
Yeah, repeat the question.
oh my gosh, it was a long one. It was about narrative process and whether, because I isolate when I write. And I should probably clarify that a little bit and explain that I don't isolate, I'm out reporting, but I isolate from my friends and a little bit from my family. Not very much from my family, but a little bit. And I have to do that. I'm out in the world doing the reporting, I bring it back, and then I have to have a very quiet time with it. So I had a co-author also, and we had laid out a blueprint for our story. We had every chapter outlined, and then we each worked on reporting different chapters. And so I didn't feel that I needed any, that the isolation was hurting me in that regard, because I was always talking to my co-author. I always saw my family. But social obligations and stuff like that, you get invited to something, say, no, I can't do it, it's a writing day. So I think maybe I didn't quite explain it well.
So if I might, I promised the authors they could do this. I'd like to hear from you as a last closing remark. Let's aim for 30 seconds. What you would tell the writers in the audience or the readers how to read better and read more widely. Any message for them? 30 seconds. Yeah.
He's trying to wrap up, so let's hear. I don't know what you're writing, but please feel free to approach any or all of us afterward for some more information or more advice, or not, because not like we're experts. We just happen to have some work here.
To clarify my bad question, we're at a Pan America event, right, which is about the First Amendment and making America better. So how can readers and writers make America better?
Stay as educated as you can. Know what's going on in the world around you, and reach out to credible sources of information.
30 seconds. Very good. I will say that I would encourage people to read widely and as much as they can. Books, I would say newspapers, but however you get your news.
Yes.
I know they still exist, but they do. I read them online though. And
may the record reflect that there's a woman with a beautiful top, which is newsprint top, and she just put her face in her hands.
I'm really sorry. My point is, don't get in a bubble. Read other people's viewpoints. Don't. I hear so often, well, how do I know it's credible? Well, hopefully you have critical thinking skills. And if you're reading a wide variety of things, books, novels, everything. I mean, I'm such a reader. So I would just say read a lot of diverse stuff.
Even national.
Yeah, if you have to read a national
Or even from the U of A.
Read, subscribe to, and support your local media outlets. If you work in a newsroom, unionize it.
Boom. Anything to add to that?
Okay. Well, I don't know how to make America better. I'm just a writer, and I guess the only way I can make America better is to tell the truth.
Beautiful. So beautiful. That is perfect. So I have two more sentences essentially thanking the beautiful people up here. But before I do that and before we all break, I have an instruction for you that was passed on to me. As soon as we're done, we are asking you, when you stand, to fold up your seats as is a tradition here at Poison Pen, and lean them against the bookshelves. And the test is to see if you get them all the same direction. That's how they should be, not hither and yon. So then you're going to do that. We're going to move this table out. The authors are going to be sitting back here for conversation, book sales, what have you, and they're going to make some forever friends, I get the feeling. So I'll just conclude by saying, after today, I and everybody here can safely report that journalists make great book authors. These journalists anyway, know how to turn a phrase, spin a yarn, engage readers in history, and ultimately make a difference in lives, communities, people, and organizations. Thank you to our authors. Go forth and write more, and let's put our hands together and show them some Poison Pen love. all.